Welcome to the garden question and answer video that we do each week here on the channel. You can ask gardening questions down in the comment section below the video, and that's where we pick from. Last week's, I was in the same ponderosa pine forest here in Arizona, and that one I shot right before it was going up. This one is actually the next day, so this is a full week before. So your questions from these last two will be on our one when we get home. So then I think we'll be right on time after that. But a couple of times here on this trip, I've shot some way out in advance just to, so you asking a question on a Sunday doesn't mean the next Sunday is when it showed up. It may have showed up 2 weeks later or something like that. So, but they'll be more aligned when we get back to the house. What else is going on? By the time you see this, we'll be almost home from this trip, and we'll see what the garden looks like. There's been a couple frost advisories, but doesn't look like anything at this point has actually had any frost on it. So I think we're coming home to still a lot of color in the garden. We shall see, and you guys will see that soon enough. So there's 20 something questions written down here. So let's jump into them. And we'll have a couple of new, we'll have a couple of new t-shirts coming for December, and a couple other discounts on some other things as well. So we'll talk about that in next week's Q&A. All right, somebody has a 30-year-old ash tree. They lost one. They had two of them. They lost one, and they've been paying $300 every other year to treat for borers. Opinion on whether it's worth this effort. Eventually succumb anyway. They're in New York, Northern Kentucky. I don't know the answer to this. It's really hard to give up. These ash trees are so beautiful, and we were in, the emerald ash borer has entered Oregon, and we were filming in Western Oregon at Schmidt Nursery, and they've got an arboretum there with the trees that they've introduced over the years, and some that they haven't introduced, but beautiful arboretum. We shot a video with 20 shade trees. I don't know when that video will go up, probably sometime after we get home, but enjoyed shooting in that garden. But there's these beautiful American ashes in there, and now that it's entered Oregon, it's just probably a matter of time before they succumb to it. So I don't know whether you continue this or not. I understand why someone would want to hold on to one of these beautiful trees. The fall color is so crazy on them. They stand out from a mile away, this time of year, and it'd be hard to have one that you really love and just watch it go. So I'll leave that up to you. I'm at some point it's probably going to succumb to it in some, and it may not be, worth the effort of using chemistry to try to stop it. Unfortunately, it's no good answer to that one. But I feel your pain, and we absolutely love them. It's one of our, it's a great loss, for sure. And Steph and I saw them in Wisconsin just standing dead in the forest, so it was, where it's actually come through. Let's see. So somebody asked if 2 o'clock in the afternoon until 6:30 considered strong for part sun plants, or is 10 to 2 sun stronger? They have a Coosa dogwood that they want to plant in some part shade, and it's one called Summer Fun. It was a Talon Buckholtz introduction. We were filming at Buckholtz Nursery, several videos that you guys will have seen at this point. So typically, we want them, like any other dogwood, and not all day sun. I tend to think that like 10 to 4 is the time of day that you would need sunscreen. Like, you're guaranteed that's the time of day that if you went to the beach without sunscreen, you'd get burned. Well, think about the plant the same exact way. That 10 to 4 o'clock period is really where the sun's on the highest angle there. And so, I probably won't want them more than maybe a couple of hours of that. So, for me, 2 to 6:30 is fine. It's a good time. That I think you'd probably be okay with that. 10 to 2 gives you 4 of those hours, hard question to answer. But the thing about putting plants in too much sun or a little too much shade is at least that doesn't kill them. You know what I mean? It's like if you put a plant in a place that gets too much water, that can just kill it. If you put a plant, there's several scenarios in which you could just kill the plant But typically if you put it in a spot and you see that it's a little crispy next summer, sometimes they can adjust to it if it's just a little crispiness. But you know, if you think it's beyond that, it's not going to kill it, so you could move it at that point. So it's not life or death sometimes on sun or shade. We can make adjustments. It's okay to move. I consider these plants like chess pieces. You know, they can be moved around the garden when needed. So that's the way I think about it. But yeah, I think anything between 10 and 4 is that kind of period of time that can really burn plants. And I don't think you'd want more than about 2 or 3 hours of that time on things that are for part shade. Does honeydew on crepe myrtles cause sooty mold on deciduous azaleas leaves nearby? So yes. So what happens with, we get aphids a lot of times on crepe myrtles. Not all of them, but a lot of times we tuck crepe myrtles up against foundations and they don't get good air movement on them. And they get a lot of that tender new growth. We tend to over-fertilize things in our gardens. We tend to fertilize the turf nearby. We tend to water things and push them a bit more. They grow faster in our ornamental gardens. And aphids really love that new tender growth on crepe myrtles. And their secretion is a sweet, it's called honeydew, basically aphid poop. That drips onto all of the leaves on the crepe myrtle, and then you get this thing called sooty mold. It's a fungus that forms on the leaf on top of that honeydew. And you know, you'll see ants on the tree too going up there for that honeydew. It's because it's sweet. But that black, anything that's underneath, you know, will also get that sooty mold on it or nearby as well. So yes, it can be, and it can be unattractive at times. Usually you can take a water hose, once it starts to dry a little bit on the leaf, you can take a water hose and kind of wash it off a bit. But crepe myrtle placement sometimes matters because it can cause that, just everything in the bed to have black leaves during the summer and fall months. So somebody noticed Thuja hedges in France instead of boxwoods. Is it used in the US? Is it a good idea? So yeah, it definitely is used in the US. Thuja occidentalis, which Emerald arborvita, degroots, and so many more. We probably have 5 different ones in our garden in Raleigh that are little miniature versions, all different types of selections on these. They're native to the Northeast United States up into Canada, way Northeast, not Pennsylvania's apparently too hot for them, and a little bit in the highest mountains in North Carolina. But yes, they can absolutely be hedged. We see it all over Canada, and when you get up into Maine and places like that, they just hedge the tops off of them. It's no big deal. It works great. Deer do love them. So if if you're looking at a boxwood hedge versus a arborvita hedge, keep in mind that, you know, if you have deer, the boxwoods would be your better choice overall. But yeah, you can absolutely hedge them. Doesn't seem to have any impact on them whatsoever. We filmed some. We were in a city. No, it wasn't in Cleveland. Well, Cleveland had the hedging thing at the garden, but where were we riding our bikes that we filmed all those hedges in that town? That was in Canada, right? Or was that in... You remember we filmed? But yeah. Well, anyway, I've got some footage somewhere of them being hedged and many other things being used as hedges in much colder areas, and I just don't remember where that is. I'm going to use it at some point. We were just filming it because it was like garden after garden after garden. It had interesting things that they were using for hedging. Okay. So would pine bark mulch used continually for a year change the pH in Fayetteville, North Carolina? No, not at all. You've had pine trees on that land for eons, and it's, you know, your pH, the pH of your soil is more related to how much rainfall it's had over a certain period of time, plus the plants can have some impact on that over a very long period of time. But these pH related things are mainly how much lime you have existing in the soil, how much limestone there is present in the soil. That would determine most of it. And then, you know, other things can make a difference over time. Rain can, you know, changes your pH over time. But Fayetteville's been a pine forest for when Europeans got there, longleaf pines were, they said you could walk on top of them. It seemed like there were so many. And they were from Norfolk, Virginia, all the way to East Texas. Basically the entire Southeast was these giant longleaf pines. So it's had pines on it for a long time. It's had pine straw, and I'm standing on pine straw right now. Pine needles when they're green, have an incredibly low pH, something like 2.5 or something crazy like that, if I remember correctly. And then as they brown out and break down, the pH tends to go to neutral on everything as it composts. Okay, so most of the time, the organic material that gets on top of the soil will have maybe a short-term issue, but not a long-term issue, if that makes any sense. And your 1 year of pine bark on it is nothing compared to the 10,000 years or more that it had of pine bark before that, or however long those pines stood there in the Southeast. I don't know. What is considered a thin layer versus a thick layer of mulch? It depends on the mulch, actually, because if it's something that's really chunky, if you were using pine bark nuggets, which I don't recommend because they float, they're chunky, like a big, I'm in a national forest, so I won't rip a big piece of pine bark off of this, but pine bark nuggets are like this big. Pine bark mini nuggets would be maybe that big, and then pine bark mulch or fine pines, some people might call it, would be little tiny pieces of the pine bark, off of one of these trees. So if it was the chunky pine bark nuggets, you could go pretty deep with it. It breathes, it gets air down there. It's not going to hurt anything I don't know why you'd want to put it that deep, but I don't think it would cause you any issues. Same thing with like wood chips. You can kind of go deeper with them because it breathes. But the finer, the triple shredded hardwood mulch that I use, it is a little chunky, but it does mat down. And once you get more than about 3 inches of it, it starts to develop a crust on the top that doesn't allow water to fall through it sometimes. And so if you dig in it, once it gets to 3, 4, 5, 6 inches deep, you can dig in it occasionally and find these weird dry pockets in it where it's moist in one place and it's not wet in another. And so you can cause yourself issues with finer materials that way. And it can become anaerobic at some point if it gets so deep that it starts to hold in way too, in the wettest areas in your garden, it could start to rot. So dry pockets or ultra wet pockets in it. So for me, when we're using the triple shredded hardwood mulch, I wouldn't want more than about 3 inches of it down at one time. And I think probably 2.5 inches or 2 inches twice a year is better than putting down 4 to 5 inches at one time. So that's kind of my thought on it. But the chunkier the material, the less it's going to matter because things can still operate. Air can move, roots will be fine underneath it, won't hold water typically as much. Let's see. This person needs to overwinter pots of arborvitae, Gara, Hydrangea, Hosta, and 7B East Tennessee. Which side of the house is best to tuck the pots to protect them through the winter and away from the winds? So I think the east side of your house is the best side of your house to put them on. And the reason for that, it'll get a little bit of morning sun, but then it'll be in the shade in the afternoon. If I put them, let's go through the other scenarios. If I put them on the south side of the house, that's where the sun is that time of year, and they're black containers, and so they're probably going to wake up too soon in the spring, okay? If I put them on the west side of the house, again, that's the side the sun's setting on. It could give you a little bit of heat, additional heat, which you would think would help the plant survive the winter, but it might actually cause the plant to wake up prematurely in some sort of warm spout you're having during the winter. And then the northwest side of your house is going to be where the wind is going to be in the wintertime. That's where your cold wind's going to be in the wintertime, and I want to keep the cold wind off of it. So my goal is to get them asleep and keep them asleep. And the best side of the house best side of the structure to do that on is the east, because I just want to keep them asleep. Because, when plants are dormant, really dormant, they can take a lot more cold than you think. A lot of times, a lot of plant damage happens because the plants don't go fully dormant during the wintertime, or you get this one warm week in February and the plant starts pumping water up in it, pumping juices up in there ready to leaf out again, and then it hits, cold happens again. So that's my strategy, and would be the east side of the structure, out of the wind, out of the sun, the afternoon sun, that might wake them up early. Let's see. All right. With that said, you might not want sun, that when that sun comes up in the east in the morning, if you had taller things, it can cause cracks in some things to get sun early in the morning on something that's frozen solid. So you might throw some sort of frost protection blanket or something over them on that east side, or make sure they're close enough together and a little bit of pine straw or leaves or something is piled up around the pots just a bit to keep it from overwarming too quickly in the morning for that 3 or 4 hours that it was going to be in the sun maybe. Okay. This person found an Elizabeth Magnolia there in zone 5B, and that's the one that's reputedly amongst the most cold hardy. So they're happy to have found it, but they can't plant it now. It's 7 to 8 feet tall. The best way to overwinter it. Well, it's definitely not hardy in the container in zone 5B because the roots would be exposed above the ground, and the roots are more cold sensitive than the top of the plant is. So it's really a matter of keeping that pot from freezing solid all winter. We had a problem growing Southern Magnolias in Johnston County, where my nursery was in Raleigh, and they're native to my backyard. And we had a hard time in containers. They are sensitive, much more sensitive to root damage than a lot of other leafy evergreen things in a nursery setting. I would be amazed how much damage I could take in a even 25-gallon container magnolias over the course of the winter. They were 7 or 8 feet tall and I couldn't protect them, very well. So I think you're going to need to drag this in and out of a garage. I think I'd want it outside as much as possible, but in zone 5B, it's going to be cold a lot probably. So I just don't want that pot to freeze solid and stay solid frozen for any period of time. So I think it needs to go in some sort of garage for the winter time to keep that container from freezing, or some strategy, to keep that root ball from freezing without keeping it warm. We do, again, need plants to go dormant. We need them to sleep through the winter. But a frozen container would likely kill your very cold hardy variety of magnolia. Okay. This person has a small evergreen, marginally hardy shrub. I really want to survive winter. Can I simply cover it all winter, or will it need some light? Okay, so can you put something in complete darkness that's evergreen for the winter? I wouldn't do that. I would, if you're going to cover it, the reason we use frost protection blankets is because that white, thin fabric allows light through. You can see, you can go under one of those fabrics and, plenty of light is getting through it. Not plenty. Plant would probably like more light than that, but a white frost protection blanket that you can get probably very inexpensively off of Amazon, or maybe a garden center near you would have one as well. But one of those white frost protection blankets, or you could get like a 50% shade cloth, will work as well. A lot of the nursery people use shade cloths now, as opposed to the white frost protection blankets, because they'll turn on their irrigation when it reaches 32 degrees, and they'll put basically an ice formation over top of that shade cloth. And then in the morning, because that shade cloth is black, as soon as the sun comes up, that ice melts off of them and their plants are able to breathe and be, protected under that shade cloth. It's a pretty good strategy a lot of nurserymen have done now, but a white frost protection blanket is what I would use, and that way you won't deny the plant so much light. This person has a Winterberry shrub that's 7 to 8 feet, so I'm guessing they're talking about a Winterberry holly, which is our native Ilex verticillata. It's full of berries, but one side is yellow. Any chance the yellow side will come back? Well, if it's a Winterberry holly, they're deciduous, so you're in the process of losing the leaves, and so you get that. Great thing about our native Winterberry holly is that you get flowers in the spring for pollinators. You get really nice foliage. I mean, especially a lot of selections of Winterberry hollies now have such great foliage on them. And then you get the berries in the fall, but then you also get a combination of great fall color. And fall color can be weird on plants sometimes. I mean, sometimes it can be a mystery why that side of the plant got fall color before that side of the plant. And you know, maybe you have some root damage on one side of it or something that shut one side of the plant down before the other. But if it is a Winterberry holly, by now, when Wes answering this question, you may have already realized that the whole plant is actually going to go dormant. And then once it does, the berries really show up at that point on them. Let's see. This person has dwarf mountain hydrangeas that they purchased in quart pots. Is it better to bump up the pot size and plant next year, keeping in a greenhouse, or go ahead and plant in the ground? So, I mean, the plants themselves are zone 5 hardy. They don't always bloom. You know, mountain hydrangeas, Hydrangea serrata. The big leaf hydrangeas and the mountain hydrangeas like serratas are sometimes won't bloom in zone 5, but the plant is very cold hardy to zone 5. So I don't know what zone you're in. If you were telling me you were in zone 6, 7, 8, I wouldn't hesitate to put those plants in the ground. It wouldn't bother me at all. If you're in zone 5, you know, they can get killed back to the ground. Buds is damaged on them, that kind of thing, so they may not flower. So I'll leave that up to you, but be careful keeping them in a greenhouse. Make sure the greenhouse is unheated. So it's some sort of, again, shade protection blanket, a shade cloth, a frost protection blanket, one of those white frost protection blankets, or an unheated structure. And on days that it's sunny outside, you might want to open the doors on the greenhouses. Every nursery in this country that has plastic greenhouses, if it's 50 degrees and sunny, there's somebody going through that place and opening the doors on them. They're not trying to get them super warm during the day. They're just trying to keep them alive at night. And so that combination, make sure you're not allowing it to, hydrangeas especially, they're super easy to wake up early and prematurely. So we would have to be super careful keeping them covered through the winter, that we didn't allow them to wake up too early. So make sure you're opening the doors on it if you are going to keep them in the greenhouse through the winter. Okay, let's see. This person grew perennials from seed in August. So young plants for a roadside stand, and they need to protect them this winter. Or do they need chill hours? Okay, they have a 20 by 120 foot high tunnel, which is basically a greenhouse. It's the same as a greenhouse. It just is unheated. So it's just a plastic tunnel where you, I guess the difference between a high tunnel and a greenhouse would be that you put some additional heat or fans or something else in it, you know, but it's still a greenhouse, right? It's just we call them high tunnels if they're just plastic over a structure with nothing else on them. And they have a heated greenhouse as well. So I'm definitely not going to use the heated greenhouse for your perennials that you started from seed. You need to keep them dormant during the winter time. So I think your high tunnel is your best option. Be careful. I would put them in the high tunnel and make sure you're opening the doors, just like I said for the other person during the day, so that you don't end up with them waking up prematurely in the spring. The other thing that can happen is be careful with the watering. If I put a dormant 1 gallon plant in a greenhouse through the winter time, basically in mass to keep them all together, and then had that plastic structure over top of them, you can get some crown rot, which would be the plant right near the surface rotting if you're overwatering them. So be super careful. You gotta water. You have to water sometime during the winter, but don't keep the crown, that top inch or so of the soil that you've used in the containers, overly wet during the winter time while the plant's dormant. It just has nothing it can do with that water. So open the doors on the greenhouse during the day and try to let them dry a little between rains and water. You know, well, we're not going to rain on them, but between waterings to not rot them this winter. That'll be your biggest struggle, is to figure that, to not rot them. Let's see. This person has an overgrown gardenia in zone 8B, Alabama. When is the best time to hard prune it? So you'd have two options to do that. You could super hard prune it right at the zone 8B Alabama, you could prune this thing March 15th probably, or to April 15th. It would, if you really hard pruned it, it would come out and you'd probably be having some flowers on it in July and August, not like you'd normally have. Or you could wait for it to bloom in May or early June, which is typically when there's going to have its peak flower. And as soon as it's finished doing it, then you could cut it. By then, the sun's up so high in the sky that the leaves that you expose lower on the plant will probably take some burn. Won't matter, ultimately, but that's my two strategies. If you do it in March, you'll delay the flowering way later into summer, and you won't get as many flowers this year. Or you could let it come out to its full flower thing and then cut it after, with a little bit of damage probably happening on the interior of the plant. Either, doesn't matter. This person has 10 ruby camellias that have wispy growth that they cut back in 8A, South Carolina. They've mulched, used holly tone fertilizer. They're in the part shade in the morning and some afternoon sun. They're 3 to 4 feet thick and beautiful, but hard to see the blooms within the foliage. Any way to help this? I'm wondering if you're over fertilizing potentially, overdoing something, and it's causing additional growth to happen even after those buds are formed. Because what happens with camellias is they come out in the spring, they grow just a little. They typically aren't. Older ones can grow a little more, but they typically only put on a little bit of growth, and then they set those flower buds, and then they flower in the fall. And you'll see on mine, I'll get these occasional, spiky growth on it that I'll cut off to make sure I can see the flowers. But my flowers are typically pretty close to the outside of the plant. I think there would be a way that I could overdo things, and force a little bit of extra growth on the plant that ends up burying the flowers a little bit. So I don't know. They're either in too much shade, which is causing it to put on that stretched growth a little bit, or you're overdoing it. One thing I would say is I don't think you need holly tone fertilizer in South Carolina. Your pH is probably quite low already. I would get your pH tested. If your pH is fine, you don't need to be adding a fertilizer that adds sulfur or tries to lower the pH. So I know this is super confusing when you go to buy fertilizer and a fertilizer says Azalea, Camellia, Rhododendron fertilizer. We used to call them ACR fertilizers because they'd say Azalea, Camellia, Rhododendron, but they were also for hollies and a lot of other things that like acid soils, low pH soils. But you're in what was part of that longleaf pine forest in South Carolina, and your pH is probably 5 or something like that. And so you just don't need a fertilizer to adjust the pH because your pH is already perfect. I hope that makes sense. Those Azalea, Camellia, Rhododendron, those fertilizers for acid-loving plants are really only for people who don't have acid soils that need that sulfur or something to adjust the pH in some way. So I'm just throwing that out as well. And then just try not to overdo it. And they may be in a hair too much shade if they're covering up the flowers. Will Platinum Beauty Lamandra tolerate the dry, sandy areas of the sandhills in North Carolina in full sun? Yeah, absolutely. That's literally the place that plant would prefer to grow, is in a well-drained soil. You are, on the cusp of where cold could hurt that plant during the winter time. We saw it at Janie's, and you guys will have seen that video by now. We saw that plant, looking just absolutely fantastic in the ground in her zone 9 garden with well-drained soil in a summer desert climate. And we kept one in a container. It finally succumbed to the cold in the 3rd winter. I think you'll be fine most winters, but if you were going to your soil is perfect, you have all conditions absolutely perfect for that plant. If we had an abnormally cold stretch, and I mean something for you in the sandhills, that would mean something in the teens, you might want to throw a cover over them just to make sure that cold isn't too cold for them. But that'd be the only thing stopping you from having them year to year. I don't think it would be wet feet. This person has 3 Stellar Ruby Magnolia plants on a slope in full sun. They look bad. They've been in the ground for about a month. They use a moisture meter and water individually when it says it's dry. and then they drown the whole area. Occasionally, they're dropping leaves. So those kinds of leafy evergreens, when you plant them in the ground, especially magnolias, will lose interior foliage pretty quickly and thin very quickly if they go through some sort of transplant shock. We were super dry the end of summer going into early fall. It's rained, looks like pretty good since we've been gone on the road. But previous to that, we watered a few times in the Raleigh garden, more than we had watered in the first 4 years we were there. We just couldn't get the garden re-wet. It had gotten so dry a couple times. And so I think that it doesn't necessarily take more than once for that plant to have been extremely dry for it to have shed that interior foliage. And then it's super easy to then go and panic and really start to water when the plant's kind of already corrected itself a bit, in an overdue. So be careful with that. But I think ultimately, I've seen a few of these go in the ground. These banana shrub type magnolias go in the ground and thin like that. And then a year or two later, flush back out of it and be fine. But that combination of them being on a slope in the full sun and having been in slightly drought conditions probably was very difficult and keep in mind, you did damage to the roots when you put them in the ground, not on purpose, but we do damage to the roots. That combination is what thinned them, I'm sure. And it's up to you on when, how patient you are with them recovering from that, but they will recover. This person's in 8A, Arkansas, wants to remove 2 5x5 crepe myrtles, but unable to dig up easily. Recommendation was made to use a liquid stump remover and paintbrush, so only affects the crepes. Do you think this will work, and how soon after that can I replant? Yeah, you can kill them with some sort of wood killing, stump killer, some sort of, that will work. It will kill them, but I don't know if you're still going to want to dig them out or not after they're dead. And you need to read the recommendations on the chemical, read the entire list for how long after you use that particular chemical can you replant. It'll say somewhere in the literature for that chemical. Sometimes you have to look it up online now. They'll just have some sort of website to go to so you can get the full, the full recommendations for it. But I don't know, if you cut them off and then paint this stuff on there, I don't think it'll be very long at all before you'd have to replant, because you're just painting it on that particular plant. But I would read everything on it, and hopefully that works out for you. So this person's in 7B, Maryland. They planted an apple tree, and it was one of the multi-grafted varieties, a few feet up from the base. So you can graft multiple plants onto the same plant and make them interesting. I've thought about making a video like that at some point, just to show grafting different apples onto the same apple and that kind of thing. But right down at the base, it has some burr knots, and you'll see this on various trees. You may see some sort of knot somewhere on it. It's basically, think about it as a scar. The plant was damaged at some point. So, who knows? A lawnmower hit it, a weed eater hit it. It was damaged in the pot when it was for some whatever reason, it had some sort of damage on it, and it develops this kind of knotting down at the bottom of it. And again, consider it like a scar, and don't worry about it. It may not look all that great, but this person, they want to know if they should bury it in mulch or spray it with dormant oil or anything like that. No, a burr knot is just a plant basically protecting itself, putting a scar on something, same as your body would do, same as anything would do. So it had, don't worry about it. And as the tree ages, as the trunk diameter gets bigger, a lot of times those kinds of imperfections around a graft or around the bottom of the tree will kind of fade into it a bit in time. But burr knots are not that big of a deal. Typically, just an unattractive little scarring on a plant that is where it just protected itself. Let's see, any point trying to grow lavender in 8A, Georgia on a west-facing slope? They added vermiculite. to try to help with the drainage. Maybe that phenomenal lavender is the one I would try. You don't have to go and break your bank and plant 60 of something to try to experiment. You can experiment with 3 or 1. So that's probably what I would do, is I would try to find phenomenal. Maybe there's a couple others out on the market now that are supposed to be more heat and humidity tolerant. Humidity is the biggest problem that we have with them, and winter wet is that's our biggest problem. But if you have a slope, you're working on the drainage, maybe you're okay with it. The cold's not going to be a problem. The heat's not going to be a problem, really. It's just humidity and winter wet. So yeah, try 1. Again, phenomenal is one that's supposed to be very good for us. This is the last one I'm going to do for this week. This is number 20, and we'll be back in the garden when you see the next Q&A in Raleigh, and we'll again be slightly more up to date on question at that point. This person has an osmanthus. This person has an osmanthus fragrans in Zone 9B, Central Valley, California, with hot summers. It's a 5-gallon plant. Is it best to avoid planting in area with hot afternoon sun? Yes. Almost 100%. That's a plant that will take full sun in Raleigh, but you're 115 degrees and dry air. And so where your struggle is, and it's interesting, we don't see a lot of leafy evergreens there. There's 2 problems. Number 1, the pH seems to be a little bit higher because you just don't get as much rain. And so it's a pH related thing that a lot of these leafy evergreen plants, azaleas, camellias, rhododendrons, I can go down this list, they really like acidic soil. And so you may have an issue where I don't know what your pH is. So that could be problematic. But the other problem is when a leafy evergreen plant that tends to try to grow, when it's warm outside, when it's 115 degrees and you have dry air, even if the base of that plant is watered, it struggles to get water up into the top of the plant during the heat of the day. And so you'll end up with some burning on the leaves, even though you're like, well, I watered it, I don't know what's happening. It just can't get water up through itself fast enough, and it'll start opening the stomata and blowing water out as well, trying to cool itself around the plant. And so that's where the struggle is. So yes, part shade on plants that, sometimes in the east that we can have in the full sun, but 115 degrees, dry air. You may have an issue with your pH too. I would get your pH tested in the Central Valley in California and see what it is. Hopefully it's lower than 7, and that will help that osmanthus as well. So thank you guys so much for asking questions, participating in these videos. We'll be back at the house for the next one, and ask questions in the comment section below this video. Thanks for watching.